This is a video about a particular kind of person in academia. I'll start with a party in the social science graduate students at the University of Michigan I went to maybe 30 years ago. And social psychology, #1 department in the world was University of Michigan 30 years ago. I don't know what it is now. But it was top ranked in the world, #1. And I went to this party, and everyone there was an idiot. And I mean, there are nicer words to say it, and I could run through my vocabulary to say it in some nice euphemistic way, but it nets out to idiots. These were stupid people, and their brains were not impressive brains at all. They were pitiful, and you just felt sorry for these. And they were deluded because they were extraordinarily arrogant. They were ill-read. They had not read widely at all. They had not read deeply at all. They had very few frameworks for understanding their own favorite ideas and thoughts. And they were really businessmen in a strange way, more businessmen-like than businessmen were, in a strange way, in a way that makes businessmen unpleasant to eat lunch with. Now I'm going to switch context a little bit and come to Japan. Ritz-Carlton Hotel opening in Tokyo 3-4 years ago. American Chamber of Commerce meeting there, and as part of sort of celebrating the opening of the hotel, and the initial cocktail hour, and then you have dinner, and you sort of jockey for, you know, every person has two sides, a left side, a right side, and then sometimes an opposite side. So maybe 5 places, me, the people left and right of me, and the 3 people facing me around the table. 5 good places around the good people where you can have a conversation during dinner that's pleasant and enlightening. And so if you sit within that set of 5 around a good person, you're going to have fun. And if you sit next to the bad guys, you're going to have a really, like, pulling teeth kind of thing. You don't want to sit next to bankers. You know, they just sort of have various ways, euphemized ways of, I steal money from old ladies, which is basically how they make money, and I get subsidies from the government. So they can either talk about government welfare, which they get every day in the terms of they can borrow money cheaper than the rest of us can. And if you're too stupid to make money at the interest rates they get, you're really stupid. And then they steal money from old ladies by obfuscating what they're really selling and legally explaining things, and knowing that the legally required language is way over the heads of these old lady, old man customers, and ruining their retirements and getting ripoffs off of them. And, you know, I'm not exaggerating. I have hundreds of students out in the world who did these jobs at banks, and who left banking and went into software or game development because they got tired of stealing from old ladies. One guy's job joined Sumitomo Bank and Trust, I think. He said his first 2 years, all he did all day was to go into this office, meet old ladies and old men who had lost all of their retirement money in a packaging of security back to CDO type thing, and collateralized debt obligation, lost all their money. This is Japan, lost all their money or their retirement savings, and his job was bowing very, very low and apologizing to one old lady after another, one old couple after another, and after a year and a half, he had gone through hundreds of these people whose lives had been utterly ruined by his bank, and he actually hated the bank. These were evil people. This was an evil group of people. This is a group of legally mandated elite college graduate gangsters. And he began to realize that Todai and Kyodai and Yamaguchi Gumi, the drug importing gangsters, were all one group of people, and that the elite colleges were essentially gangster creators. And that he had fallen in for that, and he lost his worship of the elite in his own society, and he no longer had the male hormone drive to participate to the top ranks of that elite, because the guys at the top ranks were thieves and were happily ruining the lives of hundreds and hundreds of old ladies and old men. And if you meet them face to face and look at what they eat now and where they live, you cannot respect your bank anymore. You just cannot respect the Kyodai, Todai elite grads who steal every day from people and call it a job, and concentrate on the new car they bought and the new boat they got and the 3rd house they bought, and ignore the fact that 100 old ladies and men lost their house to pay for your boat and your house and your car. And in 2 years, he went through this transformation, and he called me one day saying that he had switched to Square D or Square Enix, this video game company doing software. And I asked him why there. I mean, I understood that. I warned him that joining a bank would be the same as bankers, physicians, and gangsters are all the same occupation. Saying I teach all of my students, and they all live off of stealing money from old ladies. And students think I'm deluded and exaggerating. And they get these jobs, and they find out that I'm very, very careful in my language and very, very accurate. And so but I didn't know why he'd just flipped out to a software video game company. And he said, well, a side effect of being in the bank is that the technology used by banks is 30, 40 years old because it's managed by MBAs who are incapable of understanding any technology at all, and yet who are arrogant, so they pretend to manage technology. And the result is they manage technology that they are able to understand, which means the bank is 40 years out of date. And he wanted to know what technology had been doing the last 40 years since for 2 years at this bank. He hadn't learned anything about it. So that's a second example. Now, I'm talking about running into stupidity in the one story and running into evil in the other story. And the stupidity comes from the world's most elite people, the world's #1 academic department. And the evil comes from the world's #1 academic department. And so you run into this elite and you at times experience gross stupidity, just mental incapability. I'm thinking about Robert McNamara. People who think that their 800 GRE makes them generally smart, and that error makes them stupid the rest of their life. And then the elite colleges that create evil because they use 800 GRE places as a hiding place where people drift into evil without seeing it, because how could someone so elite and top-ranked as me be evil? And the wonderful thing about the many, many video interviews we have of Robert McNamara in the second half of his life after Vietnam is in almost every video you see palpably his confusion, that he can clearly see that he killed 5 million people. He's a mini Hitler, and that he can clearly see that history is going to judge him that way. There's no way. He tried to wiggle out for 10, 20 years, and gradually you can see this deepening sorrow as he realizes he's not going to be able to wiggle out from that historical judgment, that he's going to be written up as one of the world's largest mass killers. And he's a Harvard grad, a superb Harvard grad. Kennedy School, 800 math GREs. He's elite, Ford Motor Company chairman, the youngest, the first non-family chairman, CEO rather. He's so elite. How could somebody that elite be evil? And this is a mystery that puzzles him the whole last decades of his life. And it's fascinating because if you read Robert McNamara's video interviews alongside Hannah Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and I won't bother explaining what that's about for those of you too young to remember World War II and 6 million dead Jews. But it's very, very similar descriptions that she's a third party examining the mystery of how a normal bureaucratic functionary could shuffle papers for parking lots and shuffle papers for dead people as if it's exactly the same thing. And then McNamara made the same exact error, and both of them were elite, extremely competent, and their eliteness, their competence, their meisterness, their 800 math GREs, their Harvard Kennedy School brand name, hid from themselves their own drift toward evil, and then hid their evilness from the society who used them for evil purposes around them. They and society around them mistook and did not see and misread and missed their evil. And so stupidity and evil, both of them abound in elite people with 800 math GREs in the world's #1 academic departments. And probably for most people looking at this video, you and I did part ways in this way, because this is obvious common sense to me. I've lived it in my life. I've been in the room with these people. I've watched their brains operate. I've watched historical harm to trillions of dollars stolen from the American middle class, millions of people losing college educations and health care as a result of people buying their third boat and their second house and supporting the cocaine addiction and the treatment centers for the cocaine addictions of their children. I've watched this go on, and those of you that are still in the male hormone hierarchy and deluded by it and think that Harvard is a good college and that Kyoto University and Todai are good colleges and that elite smart people like that can't be stupid and they can't be evil, then you and I really part ways, because from my point of view, you are insecure emotionally and you need to praise yourself a lot in order to get out of the door each day, and you need to tell lies about the worth of your occupation and your profession in order to do your profession, whereas I don't. I can be in a horrible profession and do it watching out that I don't drift to evil in the profession. But the cost of me doing that is I walk around in the profession calling crap crap and calling evil evil where I see it. And so I don't make it bigger, or I counteract it. Whereas the people watching this video who disagree with me are doing and drifting toward evil themselves, and they don't call it evil because they praise everything about themselves, they praise everything about their profession, and therefore they don't see when they drift to evil, and they don't see the stupidity of having 800 math GREs and the other kinds of thought that make them morons, even though they're really good at little equations, which a 12-year-old brain is really optimized for. And they miss all the kinds of thought that a 20-year-old brain or a 30-year-old brain are optimized for. They just never develop that because they fall in love with themselves at 18 when they get into the top college, and they stop growing and get lazy. Essentially 8-year-old, 18-year-old brains in 50-year-old bodies. Killing 6 million people in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos for the sake of fighting a local George Washington trying to free a tiny country from French domination. How stupid can you get? And that's what Harvard Kennedy School generated in that generation. And in this generation, it generated $13 trillion stolen from the American middle class on Wall Street by Harvard elites and University of Chicago freedmen worshippers. Now, I've been at world top 3 departments, okay? And so I've watched the worship of themselves. And I've watched the ideological purity of everybody having to think the same way in these top academic departments. And I've watched the social pressure to get rid of deadwood faculty who don't think like the rest of us, who don't fit in with the Milton Friedman worship at Chicago, who don't fit in with the let's make a fortune for ourselves on Wall Street worship at Harvard. This is a video on how the best, and Halberstern in his book already wrote about it. He called the book The Best and the Brightest. That was not an accident. And he was talking about how the German best and brightest ended up killing 6 million Jews and allowing Hitler to be a dictator for 13 years, 33 to 45, so 14, with that, 12 years, and elected Kennedy and McNamara to go kill poor people in Southeast Asia so they couldn't liberate themselves from French rule. And then put all these very, very elite minds into investment banks on Wall Street and take $13 trillion from the American middle class, which hasn't been paid for yet. So the best and the brightest, Halberstern's book wrote it, that they can be extremely, extremely stupid and extremely evil. And that if you work with the best and the brightest, the only protection you and history has is people like me. And I'm not trying to praise myself too much. I'm just saying that people like me who are obnoxious by saying that, I'm sorry, but that research article, no one's going to read it, and for good reason. And I'm sorry, but Harry Robertson, I did the research to look at statistics textbooks used in the top 10 colleges of business and found that 77% of the worked examples in the textbook were wrong statistically, with parameter estimates off by on average more than 200% in the textbook examples were wrong. 77% were wrong. So the best and the brightest textbooks are 77% statistically wrong, at least for business school text on statistics. And, Harry did another paper showing that 2 years or 3 years after graduation, no University of Chicago MBA remembered anything at all, however elementary or simple, correctly about statistics. They didn't know what an F-test was. They didn't know what anything was. The teaching of statistics was just 100% ineffective and useless. And so here I was with these social psychology PhD students at Michigan, the world's #1 department, and trying to stay awake because I couldn't talk to them about any ideas that weren't in the little narrow mathematical competitive thing with other seminar professors at Stanford and Harvard that they were engaged in. And the fact that the statistics that they were using and that the Harvard guys were using were utterly wrong and didn't apply to the data sets that they were applying it to, and that their sampling was unbelievably biased, and that sampling effects are much more powerful than correlational methods are, and over wipeout correlational methods. So you get a high p-value, but if the sample is shifted just a tiny bit, you get a totally different p-value on, or a totally different relationship among the same variables. They don't know any of that. And as I've mentioned in other videos, when statistics were taught in agriculture to agriculture students, they had visual feedback of leaf shapes and colors and how the fields looked, and you developed a real common sense about statistical operations. And then when statistics moved to business schools, where it was just rows of numbers on a spreadsheet, people lost all common sense, and we've had 2 generations of utterly incompetent professors publishing at least 80% of the Psychology Review, 80% of the articles in Psychology Review, the statistics are wrong. Sorry to all you editors, but the editors do not understand them, and the people submitting the papers do not understand them. And they think they're elite, they think they're the #1 journal in psychology, and they're just mathematically stupid. And it's embarrassing, but it's typical for academia, and they're so arrogant, and they're so used to. Now think about the teacher-professor relation. And this is what I wanted to get to early and forgot. Hope Google gives me an extra minute or two here. Think about the teacher-professor lesson. You are 30 years old, assistant professor. No, you're not. You got your PhD at 36. So you're 36 years old as assistant professor teaching 22-year-olds and 24-year-olds, master's students. And then, so the gap between you is 10 years or so. And then you're 40 years old teaching 24-year-olds, and the gap is 15 years. You're 45 years old, the gap is 20 years. And you're 50 years old, and the gap between you is 25 years. So the longer you're a professor, the greater the gap between the amount of reading you have done and thinking you've done and the amount your students have done. And the students look dumber and dumber the older you get, and look lazier and lazier the older you get, simply because the gap between what's in your mind and your habits and your skills built up and your knowledge built up and where they are at, that gap keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, the result of that is it takes less and less quality from you and effort from you to impress and lead them. And the professors can react to this 2 ways. One way is, and I think this is the best reaction, is to realize that students have no place in college or university. Colleges and universities are not about students and teaching. The faculty's job is to maintain and develop a body of knowledge. That's 99% of the faculty job. And you do that by collaborating with your colleagues and doing research ventures and projects with your colleagues and publishing results. And then the other 1% of your job is inviting the best of the students to participate in your development of the field of knowledge. And then the teaching thing is just a way to make money for the institution, a tax everybody pays. I think that's the right way to go. And the wrong way to go is to lower your standards, because it takes less effort and less ideas to impress this giant growing gap, and to get away, because students don't know, with praising your ideas and praising your research and praising your colleagues' research in your journals that you're all publishing each other's papers in. After all, I'm the editor of your paper in my journal, and you're the editor of my paper in yours, and if you're nice to me, I'm nice to you. I'll publish you, you publish me. And that collusion, there's just reams of it at the top 10 especially. And you get into this situation where nobody has ever criticized anything you said or wrote for 20 years in a row. And you believe you're great because of that. And I'm sorry, but I've been around a little bit in this world, and I don't buy that kind of self-love, and I don't buy that kind of basis of pride. And so if you are subject to that system, you're going to find having me next to you occasionally is prickly. I don't say terrible, but it's prickly, because I don't buy into that stuff. And so you tell me that, well, this is a paper that's actively discussed in the field, as if I'm supposed to care. 90% of the people in the field are publishing junk, and the statistics are wrong. And so I'm supposed to, you got 5 idiots that agree with you that your wrong statistics are just as wrong as their wrong statistics. And that's supposed to impress me, that other people like this error, and therefore this error is not an error? Don't kid me. That's not going to fly with me. It may fly with your colleagues, but it's not going to fly with me. And, show me that your sampling is not biased, and or at least counteract with your statistics the bias that's obvious in your sample. And show me that you have normal distributions for everything that you're analyzing with analyses that require normal distributions. And then that'll help us, because that gets rid of about 80% of the wrong statistics that are published in Psychology Review, just those two corrections there.